Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we continue to unpack the anatomy of a reload, because after winning the national championship in Ohio State's case and after winning the Big Ten in Oregon's case, maybe there was going to be a step back. That's why Penn State got all the preseason hype. And yet, coming out of Oregon's double overtime win in Happy Valley, the Ducks have found themselves once again making a case to be not just the best team in the Big Ten, but one of the best teams in the entire country. We've all found a couple of players that best represent how this reload has worked out so well for Dan Lanning's group out there in Eugene. But before we turn the spotlight to the players, just looking at this Ducks program and looking at this team through the first month of the season, Tom, what do you think has been some of the important factors that have contributed to a strong performance?
I mean, it's not all that dissimilar to what we were talking about with Ohio State in the last segment, where, these are both programs that had a lot of roster turnover coming off of very successful seasons last year. Although I guess Oregon would probably tell you it was a bittersweet success given that they lost in their first playoff game to the Buckeyes, but they did win the Big Ten. And you looked at all the new guys, the new faces, Dante Moore, who had experience at quarterback at UCLA a few years ago, but hadn't really seen much significant playing time the last couple of years as he was sitting behind Dylan Gabriel last year. He stepped in and played well. And the one difference is, as Danny mentioned in the last segment, Ohio State had turnover at the coaching staff on the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator. Oregon's had consistency. So what we've really just seen is Dan Lanning's program building really starting to pay fruits with the recruiting classes that they've put together, because this is the first team where I think predominantly the significant contributors are kids that they recruited out of high school who are now stepping into larger roles. And I think that you are seeing that those stars that were next to their names, they were correctly placed there because they're all very talented.
Tom, sticking in that vein, let's go to the Oregon's linebacking core. Bryce Bosher was a baseball kid who came into Oregon, walked onto the football team, promptly gained 45 pounds after getting drafted in baseball, and is now a freakazoid linebacker for the Ducks. Jerry Mixon, same thing. Really hadn't seen the guy play a ton. In-house kid, good program development by Oregon. Oregon's linebackers are nasty, and we just didn't know necessarily a ton about this Oregon defense coming into the year, but they have, these young guys are showing up, and now it's their time to shine, and they really are.
When I look at this team, I had a feeling that we were kind of sleeping on them a little bit. Even though they were in the preseason top 10, it was either a lot of people picked Penn State, some people picked Ohio State to repeat. And we forgot that they were undefeated and had a perfect run through the Big Ten championship last year. But you know who I don't think that went overlooked by was Dan Lanning, because the chip on the shoulder mentality, or just a killer instinct or an intensity that is just off the charts, it is relentless, and that is embodied in their head coach. When you see him on the sideline, when you hear him talk to the media, when you see the focus and motivation that he brings to this team, I don't know if we gave it proper consideration coming in, but it will not become overlooked ever again, because he feels like they're on a mission, and that Rose Bowl loss to Ohio State is something that's lingered entire offseason and rubbed Dan Lanning and those players the wrong way. That's why I think they're so dangerous, and I think you saw that on display against Penn State.
Danny, every SEC message board is trying to get Dan Lanning as their head coach. NFL teams are hoping they can get Dan Lanning as the head coach. And yet, you know what I'm seeing from Dan Lanning? His phrase, unfinished business. That's what you're talking about right there. That's the chip on the shoulder that they've got there in Eugene. Special coach, special coaching staff they've been able to hold together. We did want to turn the spotlight to some players. Danny, I'll let you get first word there. Who are some players that best exemplify the anatomy of the reload?
I'm going to look at the defensive side of the ball, because I think the defense might be better than it was last year. So it starts with having guys kind of continue to develop. And Mateo Uyunglele last year kind of had a breakout season, and this year he's one of the best defensive players in the entire country. I mean, he's coming off the edge, and he's really just been an imposing force. And then it's the ability to add guys to the transfer portal. Bear Alexander has never reached expectations, whether it was at Georgia, whether it was USC. But all of a sudden, guess who started to show up a couple times in critical situations? Bear Alexander for the Oregon Ducks, which is a huge depth piece. I think that's the difference between the top teams and the teams that are just below there, is the ability to have depth, so that when your guys get tired, or, if you have injuries, God forbid, that you have those depth players come there. And it was a luxury item to me to bring in Bear Alexander, take that risk. But that risk so far looks like it's paid off pretty big.
Danny, Go ahead, Tom.
I was just going back to the Dan Lanning. Where did he come from? He came from Georgia. So he spent a lot of time on Kirby Smart's staff, and he saw that the best way to build a national title contender was to make sure that your lines of scrimmage were strong. And we saw Oregon coming into this year having to replace a lot of guys on the offensive and defensive line. And so far, early returns suggest they've done a very good job. On the defensive side of the ball, Danny, you just mentioned Bear Alexander. I'll talk about one of the guys lining up next to him, and Amori Washington, who saw some time last year as part of the rotation, but has stepped into a starting role for that team this year and has been an absolute force stopping the run and plugging up the middle of the A gaps and just taking players out and not giving up anything. I'd like to see him take a little bit more of a step forward as far as disrupting the passing attack and collapsing the pocket, but I think that's in there, and he just hasn't had to do it to this point. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we saw they have to bring in a whole bunch of new players for there too, and they brought in Emmanuel Pregnon from USC, who honestly, when I watched last year, I wasn't all that impressed by. So when I saw Oregon go after him in the portal, I was kind of like, oh, I was a little skeptical, but man, I was wrong, because he is playing fantastic for this team. I think go back to watch Saturday night against Penn State, against one of the best defenses in the country in a really difficult environment to play in. He was the best guy on that offensive line. I thought he had a phenomenal game, and going forward, I think that's going to pay off huge for the Ducks.
Tom, staying on the development curve here. Has anybody played quarterback better in the country through the first month of the season than Dante Moore? Like, I think him leaving UCLA and going to get the developmental year of sitting the bench, learning the system, learning how to play the position of quarterback, on the bench for Oregon, that has helped him so much. I think there's a couple guys you make an argument for, but the list is really short. Like, he's operating at such a high level. The moment was not too big for him in Happy Valley. Very few places in the sport are as intimidating as that in a whiteout at night in Penn State. Dante's just been so good.
I'm going to go to the running back position where they are traveling like, I don't know. I mean, they got like 8 guys on the roster. The travel roster has about 7 running backs as well. They work in new bodies all the time. And yet, while we were looking at some certain transfer portal additions, while we knew what they had in Noah Whittington, who's been working his way back to full health, I cannot be any more impressed with freshman running back De'Aaron Hill. Currently, he's leading the team only with, 270 yards on the season because of that timeshare. But, man, he stepped up with so many key runs against Penn State. He's averaging about 10 yards per carry. He's got that explosive ability. And the offensive line, which I think is another maybe unsung aspect of the way that this Oregon team, Danny, to your point, might be even better in certain areas from where they were last season. The offensive line is opening up holes, and De'Aaron Hill is just getting through there and making big plays. When we talk about the depth, when we talk about the expectations that this Oregon team could be playing 15, 16 or more games into this season, the fact that they've got a freshman who's already prepared for the big lights of going up against a Penn State defense in Happy Valley, and he answers the call. Man, what an impressive evaluation by the Oregon staff, and what great work by De'Aaron Hill to be able to say, yes, I am ready in this loaded running back room to jump up and to deliver the plays that are needed. So, I mean, whether it is the development, whether it is the evaluation, there just seems to be, from transfer portal to recruiting out of high school, everything is clicking for this Oregon team, and that's why they've already logged one of the best wins in the entire country, going on the road to beat Penn State